Hello everyone! It's finally time to give you another complete tour of my entire poison dart frog collection. My name is Emmanuel, you're watching Tropical Tutorials, and welcome to my frog room. I have 20 vivariums, 50 poison dart frogs of 8 different species, as well as a couple of tarantulas and geckos, so we have quite a lot to get through today. This year has come with some major changes to the frog room, including the completion of my biggest project ever, several new vivariums, and a couple of new frogs that I'm really excited to show you. So without further ado, let's get into it. I'm going to start with this vivarium that houses my Dendrobates leucomelas Guyana banded. These were my first poison dart frogs, which I got 5 years ago, though this wasn't the first setup I made for them. I have 3 males and 1 female, being my original breeding pair and 2 of their offspring that I decided to hold back. This enclosure has been set up for about 4 years now, and it's only getting more and more beautiful over time. It's built in quite a simple way though, with a background only consisting of a synthetic mesh called Hygralon attached straight to the glass, but it's grown in very well. I recently found a folder with a bunch of footage from when I initially set up this vivarium, which I had completely forgotten about, so at some point I might turn that into the most delayed vivarium build video of all time. Next, we have 2 completely new vivariums, which will eventually house some thumbnail dart frogs. These enclosures are relatively small, but the good thing about them is that they are narrow but very deep, which makes it easy to escape and plant them in a dynamic way, so that the frogs can feel safe and secure. For now, they are only inhabited by some morning geckos, because I ended up getting a bunch of small spiders in these tanks, which I wanted to get rid of, and morning geckos are excellent spider control. Morning geckos can be kept together with medium-sized and large dart frogs, but because these tanks will eventually house small thumbnail frogs, I'm going to move the morning geckos into a different tank once they've caught all the spiders before introducing the frogs. The entire process of setting up these vivariums was recorded, and a video about them will hopefully be released within a few weeks. At the top shelf I have 2 more enclosures of the same size, which I haven't scaped yet, but they will eventually also house thumbnail frogs or froglets. Now it's time to give you an update on my biggest project ever, the Vivarium Rebirth project. If you remember from last year's collection tour, this tank used to look completely different, but it was really old and littered with beginner mistakes, and after serving me well for about 4.5 years, it was finally time to tear it out completely and rescape it, with my most ambitious DIY background ever. The background of this tank consists of 3 elements: a buttress root tree made out of blankets dipped in cement, a fake rock wall made out of hypertufa, which is one of the easiest naturalistic DIY background methods out there, and finally some hygralon, which serves as a black backdrop that the plants can climb on. The tank is also substrateless, with filter foam serving as both the substrate and the drainage layer. If you haven't already seen my 4-part series Vivarium Rebirth, I highly recommend you to check it out, because it's by far my best work on the channel, and it covers both of the unique background methods and the rest of the setup in great detail. The tank itself is slowly but surely starting to grow in, with moss starting to establish itself on the rocks and climbers anchoring themselves into the background, but it still has a long way to go. I can't wait to see how it looks in a year or 2 from now. Since a few months back, the enclosure has housed 5 of my Epipodobates anthonii Reudaule/Gothenburg, the only dart frog that's quote-unquote native to Sweden. This is a rather rare locality of Epipodobates anthonii, which has been kept free roaming in the greenhouses of Gothenburg's botanical garden since the 90s, and the locality was unknown for a very long time. It was identified a few years ago to likely be from the area around the Reudaule River in Ecuador, but it's impossible to know the locality for certain, so we still call them Gothenburg dart frogs. Epipedobedes anthonii is one of, if not the easiest dart frog for beginners in my opinion, and they are quite prolific breeders. The males are calling all day long, and a bunch of tadpoles are currently growing up in the water feature with only a tiny bit of support feeding from me. I think I have to remove the female from this tank soon, because I don't want to be overrun with too many froglets. To clarify, water features are completely unnecessary and they are usually not recommended for dart frog tanks for numerous reasons, but Epipedobedes anthonii can handle them quite well, and it's one of the species that might utilize a small water feature to put their tadpoles in. To the left of them, we have some frogs that I've kept for about a year now, but haven't featured in a collection tour yet. These are 4 Ranitomea syrensis contamina, which is a beautiful thumbnail dart frog. Unfortunately, they aren't exactly the boldest, and at some point I've gone more than a month without seeing a single one of them. However, they are getting less skittish as time passes, and I usually see 1 or 2 every morning by now. They will hopefully become a bit bolder if they start breeding in the future. Their enclosure has been set up for about a year and a half, and it's not really anything too special, but it's slowly but surely starting to fill in. The back half is really empty though, because I used to have 2 giant bromeliads there, which both died. However, you can enjoy this very suspicious orchid flower from my Masdevallia impostor. Next up, we have my shelf with 2 plastic tub setups. Plastic tubs obviously aren't as pretty as glass enclosures, but if they're set up correctly, they can make just as good homes for frogs. I also use these tubs to keep a bunch of random plants that I don't have room for anywhere else, and everything grows extremely well here, which is great for propagation. In the one to the right, I keep a second group of Epipedobedes anthonii Riudaula/Gothenburg, with 6 frogs in this one. The one to the left houses my group of 5 Phyllobedes vittatus, which is an extremely beautiful and underrated species in my opinion. It's a shame to keep such a beautiful frog in a tub where I can barely see them, but they won't stay in here permanently. Next up, I will briefly showcase my tadpole rack. I used to keep all my tadpoles in cups, but this rack is much more space efficient, with room for 30 small tubs and a few big ones at the bottom for tadpoles that can be kept communally, such as Phyllobedes and Epipedobedes. It's currently quite empty, only housing 5 Ranitomea variabilis tadpoles at the top, but I also have some eggs from other species. The next enclosure houses my pair of Dendrobates tinctorius assyrius. This is an awesome dart frog species because of their amazing blue coloration and the fact that they are extremely bold, which is a great attribute for a beginner frog. Most dart frogs are somewhat skittish and might jump away when you get close to the tank or open it up, but these guys don't care at all. Perhaps I should also mention my feeder insects. I keep 2 kinds of fruit flies, the larger Drosophila hydei and the smaller Drosophila melanogaster, which is the base food for all my poison dart frogs. I also culture pea aphids, Acritosyphon pisum, to mix it up a bit for them. I actually have videos both about how to culture pea aphids and fruit flies in case you want to learn how I do it. I also have a colony of dubia roaches for my tarantulas and my crested gecko, and some isopod and springtail cultures as a cleanup crew for my vivariums. Now we're moving on to my tarantula rack. If you hate spiders or if you only came here to see frogs, you can skip to this timestamp. For those of you who don't know, I used to primarily keep tarantulas, and this channel was originally called Tarantula Nest. However, in 2019, when I got my first dart frogs, I heavily downsized my tarantula collection, and today I only keep a small collection of 4 species in some nice display tanks. The top row consists of 3 glass enclosures which I have built myself, which are narrow and very deep to fit as many and as large vivariums as possible on a single shelf. To the left, I keep 3 Monocenthropus balfouri females, which is one of the few tarantulas that can be kept in groups. It's a rather fun species to keep, since they create beautiful web castles and they usually come out of their burrows at night. In the middle, I keep my Chromatopelma cyanopubescens female, a very beautiful and unique tarantula species with a stunning coloration. This species is also one that prefers to create a nest out of web rather than making a burrow. To the right, I keep Ophthalmopeus irminia female, which is a stunning arboreal tarantula species with a gorgeous velvet coloration and little orange lightning bolts on their feet. On the lower shelf, I keep my Acanthoscurria geniculata female Selma, which I've had since 2017 when she was less than a centimeter long. Let's just say that she is slightly bigger now. This is one of the larger tarantula species out there, and it's a fun species to keep because they are always out in the open and have a huge appetite. Now back to more frogs. On this rack I keep various thumbnail frogs in the top row and some froglets in the bottom row. These enclosures on the top row are relatively small, being the absolute minimum size for thumbnails and far too small to permanently house any bigger species. All the thumbnail breeding frogs will soon be upgraded to the new tanks that I showed you at the beginning of the tour. The left and the middle enclosures house Ranitomea reticulata, which is the frog that I have in my profile picture. There are 2 of them in each tank, and the ones to the left finally proved to be a pair after delivering their first eggs only a few days ago, which was extremely rewarding as I have worked with this species for more than 2 years with no success. The 2 in the middle tank might be 2 males, but it could also be a second pair. To the right I have my newest frogs, which I'm really excited to show you. These are 2 Ophaga pumilio punta laurel. It's my first Ophaga species, and man are they beautiful frogs. They are completely quiet so far, so they might be 2 females, but a friend of mine ended up with 2 males, so we're most likely going to do a trade in the future if neither of mine start calling. The froglet vivariums on the lower shelf are fairly empty right now, since the Swedish Frog Day, where I sell most of my froglets, was held a few months ago. The tank to the left is completely empty. The one in the middle houses 2 Dendrobates leucomelas froglets, and the tank to the right houses some Epipodobates anthonii froglets. These tanks are 30 cm or 12-inch cubes, which is too small to permanently house any adult dart frogs, but I only use them for growing out froglets for the first few months of their lives. The second to last tank houses my Ranitomea variabilis French Guiana. In many of my older videos, I referred to these frogs as Amazonica French Guiana, but in 2022, a study determined that the Amazonica populations from French Guiana and eastern Brazil were actually variabilis. Regardless of what species this locality belongs to, this is a relatively easy, active and bold species, at least for a thumbnail frog, and they can easily be kept in groups. In fact, they tend to be much more active and more prolific in groups than in pairs in my experience, which probably cannot be said about most other thumbnail frogs. I have 8 in here, but with most other Ranitomea species, I definitely wouldn't keep as many frogs together in this vivarium size. The enclosure itself has a cork bark background, and I showed on the channel how I set it up 2 years ago. Now it's time for the final enclosure of this collection tour, which houses my crested gecko, Francelina. She was my first exotic pet and has been with me since 2015, and she is 12 years old now. Hopefully, she will be with me for another decade to come. Those were all the animals that I have in my current collection. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to the channel, because it's completely free and it really helps me out. Make sure to also press the notification bell so you don't miss out on any future uploads. If you're new to the hobby, feel free to check out my playlist Poison Dart Frog Care for Beginners, where you can find several detailed videos about poison dart frog husbandry and vivarium creation. If you want to see more frequent updates about my animal room, check out my Instagram page at gecko_geek06. If you're watching this video once it releases, check out the pinned comment for a chance to be featured in my next livestream. And with that, I say thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.